We'll go ahead and call to order the meeting of the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners for Saturday, June 22nd, 2019. Vice Chairman Valentine, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could we have the roll of the commission, please?
Chairman Johnston.
Here.
Vice Chairman Valentine.
Here.
Commissioner Allenberg.
Here.
Commissioner Barnes.
Here.
Commissioner Cavilla.
Here.
Commissioner East. Commissioner Hubbs.
Here.
Commissioner Keel.
Here.
Commissioner McNinch.
Here.
And as noted, Commissioner East has an excused absence due to some family circumstances. Would the county advisory boards in attendance please stand and
Bill McElvain, Miami County Cap. Paul Dixon, Clark. Glenn Bunch, Mineral. Steve Knox, Lifeline. Rob Jacobson, Lyon. Joe Cream, Pershing. Ray Kavish, Washington County.
thank you. We'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Chairman Johnston, for possible action. The commission will review the agenda and may take action to approve the agenda. The commission may remove items from the agenda, continue items for consideration, or take items out of order. Any comments on the agenda? Any public comment on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch, seconded by Vice Chairman Valentine to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Moving on to agenda item 13, member items, announcements, and correspondence. Chairman Johnston, informational. Commissioners may present emergent items. No action may be taken by the commission. Any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. The commission will review and may discuss correspondence sent or received by the commission since the last regular meeting and may provide copies for the exhibit file. Commissioners may provide hard copies of their correspondence for the written record. Correspondence sent or received by Secretary Wasley may also be discussed. I just want to thank the people of Hawthorne for their hospitality for the meeting yesterday and today. I apologize that I was not on the tour yesterday. I traveled back home to Yerington to help my wife get prepared for a birthday party that I will be missing today. So since I'm going to miss the party and I don't want to come up missing, I went home and helped her last night, given my absence today. So anyone else with any items? Commissioner Barnes.
Well, I also want to thank Mineral County and Glenn Bunch for their hospitality. And I appreciated the pot roast last night, although I did notice there was chicken in the line.
Any other items? Director Wasley, anything? Okay. All right, with that, we'll move on to agenda item 14, county advisory boards to manage wildlife. Member items, informational. CAB members may present emergent items. No action may be taken by the commission. Any item requiring commission action will be scheduled on a future commission agenda. Any CAB items this morning? Seeing none, we'll then move on to agenda item 15, commission regulations, adoption for possible action. Public comment allowed. Upland Game Bird Stamp request. Wildlife Staff Specialist Sean Espinoza and Division Administrator Alan Janae for possible action. The Commission will review and may take action to approve up to $295,100 for projects submitted for fiscal year 2020 funding from the Upland Game Bird Stamp account. The specific Upland Game Bird Stamp projects that may be approved are listed in the agenda. Mr. Janae and Mr. Espinoza.
Thank you, Chairman. For the record, Alan Janae, Habitat Division Administrator. Much like the duck stamp yesterday, I'll give a current budget status. I've got it up here on the screen. So if you look at the beginning of FY19, the balance in the Upland account was $528,000. $2,211, with the revenue brought in during the 2019 of $266 and $26. That brought, and then also bringing in the expenditures of $390, $213, and minus the administrative 10% of $26,602, left an estimated balance at the end of FY19 and the start of FY20, which is what we would be rolling into now, of $377,222. And projections looking out this year, looking at, based on last year's revenue brought in, might be a little bit of a rise this year of $266,026 again. And again, the administrative cost of $26,602. And if approved, as per the projects we have here today, are a total of $295,100. And if that was all to work out the same, the estimated balance at the end of FY20 next year would be $321,546. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Janay?
None. Good. So, going on to the projects submitted this year, we have a total of 17 projects, asking for a total of $295,100. Depending on how you'd like to handle it, if you'd like to handle it like we did yesterday with Duck Stamp, I could just read the project, the amount being asked for, and then we can just move into questions if there are any. Is that preferable to the chair?
I would like to proceed in the most efficient manner possible, so
You want to handle it as a group? And
I think that'd be fine. I'm sure that the other members of the commission, like I, have read through the projects prior to the meeting, so I don't think we need to go through them one by one.
Great. So as I said, there's a total of 17 projects, asking for a total of $295,100. If you have any questions about the specific project, Sean Espinoza, staff specialist, can probably help with that.
Any questions from any members of the commission on the proposed project? Commissioner Hubbs?
My question that overall was in the review of some of the results and the kind of consistent pattern of seeing population numbers decline in many of the areas that we're looking at, and not really understanding if that is, I know populations vary. Every section started with, however, the population cycles vary. It could be due to X, Y, and Z. Maybe there are wildfires. Maybe there was a longer winter. And then I also read in some areas that the survey times were a little bit different, or maybe a little bit tardy this year when they were doing aerial surveys. But I guess I'm concerned about the numbers overall and the decline that's kind of noted consistently throughout each study area. And then not really understanding lambda. And I just was wondering if we could go over that, how the population cycle fluctuates around lambda and where you're hoping it would go. What would be a healthy pattern?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Commissioner Hubbs. Sean Espinoza, Upland Game Staff Specialist, for the record. So sage grouse populations, because they're a long-lived bird, cycle naturally due to largely climatic variations in the weather and so forth. And this is a pattern that we've seen throughout our history, looking at the species in terms of using let counts to determine population trends and so on and so forth. Being that they're so climate driven in most cases, it's kind of hard to tease out certain things on the landscape that may be affecting a population. So we might have a certain feature on the landscape, whether it be a transmission line or a large mine or a wildfire that could be anywhere from 1,000 to 400,000 acres in size. We're getting better at teasing out those things over time and trying to separate out how those things might affect a certain demographic parameter with respect to sage grouse. So we'll see things like a fire really have an effect on things like nest success and in some cases survival, especially with nest success because you're losing cover basically, and that's an essential importance for upland game bird populations in general. But over time in some of these populations, because of the pattern that we've been in over the last 10 years, we've had basically 3 good winters, 3 good precipitation winters out of a 10-year period. That's really not good enough to drive a population of sage grouse in an upward direction. We really need something more like half and half, basically, or a couple average winters piled up in a row so that we get the conditions necessary for good survival, good nest conditions, and then good brood survival conditions as well. The lambda estimates that you see, basically, it's a population growth rate, so it's a rate of change basically from one year to the next. That population growth rate, if it hovers around 1, is essentially a stable population. If we're anywhere above 1.0, then our population's growing. And you can see in a lot of those different graphs, for many of those years, we're in a population growth rate below 1. So if we're anywhere in that 0.95 to 1, we still feel pretty good that we're in the natural range of variation. But if we're getting down below, say, 0.9, so that's basically a 10% loss in the population, or 10% rate of change difference in the population from year 1 versus year 2. That's where we become concerned about what's going on with the population. And then what we can do is we can look at either a certain lek on the landscape, or we can look at a lek cluster, or we can look at basically a population management unit. And we can look at the differences between a certain lek or a lek cluster versus a larger population management unit, which we would consider more of a climate cluster. And if we're experiencing significant deviations between what's going on at a lek or a lek cluster compared to the climate cluster, then we know we've got some issues that need to be addressed in a specific location. So these are some pretty new and innovative science that's going on into all of this. And we're developing integrated population models for a lot of these populations that we're currently investigating. And this all plays into an adaptive management process that will go into land use plans that will be pretty important with how we approach what's going on with these sage grouse populations, and will allow a quicker response from the land management agency on the landscape to address a certain problem.
Thank you. That was very informative. So having said that, are you now looking at, and have you seen or observed any lek deviations that are off from the management area estimates? So ones that are of concern to you right now?
Yes, thanks for the question, Commissioner Hubbs. There is a publication that's being currently worked on by U.S. Geological Survey, and they've run the analysis through 2017, and what they call those are hard and soft signals, or triggers, basically, on the landscape. And there are leks across the state that have hit those soft signals, and if they hit those soft signals for more than, say, 3 years, then they become hard signals. And we're seeing a few of these areas become hard signals. So we're looking into that now, and that's becoming a part of that adaptive management strategy that both the state of Nevada, the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council, and the land management agencies are trying to incorporate into their land use plans.
So when you see a hard signal, is it the state's policy then to, maybe it's obviously not hunt those areas? I was just curious because it would be like an additional or compounding problem for that population.
So that kind of depends on if there's one or more of those hard signals affecting a lek, how big that lek might be and how much that contributes to the population. But that could be a management response that we look at Those responses are yet to be decided upon at this time, but it's certainly something that we could look at, yes.
And my last question was just in general, I was reading that the deer surveys were done in tandem with the LEC surveys, and is that normal for the department to do that? It was a rationale for having perchance missed some of the nesting behavior or brooding of the bird species. And I was just wondering, there was a comment that at times contractors are used, and would it be better to do 2 surveys versus putting them together in one, or are they simultaneously, is it the best time to do both on the landscape?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Commissioner Hubbs. We did that for efficiency purposes. We're going to be flying the spring deer surveys and some of those units at the same time anyway. We just devote 2 hours in the morning to conduct LEC surveys, and then continue on with mule deer surveys after that. This year, most things were much later than they have been in the past in terms of LEC attendance. And when those deer surveys commenced was late March, which may have been a little bit early this year. But in a lot of cases, we follow up with ground surveys in areas that we can access. We couldn't access a lot of areas this year. We augmented some of those surveys with the FLIR surveys, the infrared surveys using a fixed wing aircraft, which are pretty efficient but expensive. But in a lot of cases, there's a LEC over here in the bi-state called the Aurora LEC. We surveyed it twice aerially and then also tried to get in there on the ground. There was anywhere from 6 to 7 feet of snow on that LEC until probably the middle portion of April, end of April, and there was nobody in attendance. We don't know we know there's still birds on the landscape, but obviously with that much snow on the landscape, they just elected not to attend those LECs. You know, hens play a role in LEC attendance as well, and if there's no nesting cover available and everything's covered by snow, it stands to reason that they're seeking out other places, which could affect male attendance at those LECs too. So, I mean, we do our best, but this year was a bit of an anomaly. And that's part of the issue as well, as we're seeing these big variations from extreme dry periods to extreme wet periods in very short time frames. And that's another aspect of this that we don't understand, how that might have an effect on population performance as well.
Additional questions? Seeing none, let's go ahead and have public comment then on the Upland Game Bird Stamp Program requests. Any public comment? None? Further comment or motion from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the Upland Game Bird Stamp request as presented.
Second that.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch, seconded by Commissioner Hubbs to approve the Upland Game Bird Stamp projects as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Thank you, Mr. Janay and Mr. Espinoza. Although I don't think you're going anywhere just yet. Agenda item number 16, Commission Regulation 18-12, Amendment 2, 2019-2020, Upland Game and Fur Bearer Seasons and Bag Limits. Wildlife Staff Specialist Sean Espinoza for possible action. The Commission will consider and may vote to amend regulations for upland game birds and mammals, as well as fur bearers for the 2019 season. This regulation will also include fall wild turkey seasons for 2019 and spring wild turkey seasons for 2020. Mr. Espinoza.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
And don't forget to turn on the mic. They're tricky, I know.
You had it when it was
Well, all right, I think we're there. Thank you, Chairman Johnston, members of the commission, good morning. As in the past, I think probably the best way to handle a regulation amendment such as this is probably species by species. So If it pleases the commission, I think we'll go through the recommended changes to the sage grouse seasons first, and then the recommended changes for the turkey season quotas second. Handle them separately. That makes it a little bit easier.
That'd be fine.
So I'll just kind of summarize really quickly here our recommended changes for the 2019 sage grouse hunting seasons. Basically what we're recommending, Hunt Unit 141 in Eureka County, we're recommending a reduced season length from 9 days to 2 days, and that's based on a reduction in the population that we've noted, largely due to some of the fires that have occurred over the last 10 years in that hunt unit, the Cortez Range, as well as some expanded mining activity that's going on at the south end of the mountain that has taken up quite a bit of habitat. Hunt Unit 061 in Elko County, we're recommending a closure of that unit due to the South Sugarloaf fire. Hunt Units 104 and 121 in South Elko County, Northern White Pine County, we're recommending a reduced season length from 16 days to 9 days in that unit group. Recommending Hunt Unit 143 in Eureka County, a reduced season length from 16 days to 9 days in that hunt unit, which is the Roberts Creek Mountains. Again, we're seeing some expanded mining activity there, as well as effects from long-term drought, reducing that effective population size. We're recommending reduced season length from 16 days to 9 days in Hunt Unit 154 in Lander County. We're seeing some effects of the McGinnis Hills geothermal facility in that particular unit. We're recommending basically most of the units in White Pine County be reduced from 16 days to 9 days. Largely that's the effect of long-term drought in that county. Hunt Unit 221 and 222 in White Pine County, we're recommending actually closing those 2 units to sage grouse hunting, and that's largely due to drought in that particular area. There hasn't been much in the way of habitat change there, although there has been quite a few projects to expand habitat through pinyon juniper removal in there that we're also trying to research the effects of that. And then for the Sheldon Special Sage Grouse Hunt, we're recommending that we still maintain 2 seasons there, but we're reducing the number of permits there from 75 down to 45 in each one of those seasons.
And I guess I when I got this proposed amendment, I called the department. I wanted to speak to Mr. Espinoza. I suspect to Director Wasley, because I probably had the same question that others did. Should we still have when I see the reduction in the hunting seasons, is it closure versus a reduced season? And perhaps Mr. Espinoza, you could just share your comments that you shared with me on the continued value of having the season in terms of wing collection, as well as you think the population supports the more limited season with respect to would not be added to mortality.
Sure, thanks for the question, Chairman Johnston. We're pretty stringent in terms of the guidelines that we follow, and it's not only guidelines by the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which basically recommend that we don't hunt populations with less than 300 birds, or we feel that we're harvesting more than 10% of the adult population. And we have some more specific guidelines, strategies that we've put in place that are probably even a little bit more conservative than just the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agency guidelines, that basically place these population management units into season recommendation categories of 2 days, 9 days, or 16 days. And we have the luxury of a couple of publications that have come out, some peer-reviewed literature two populations in Nevada that have been studied for long periods of time. One's in the Montana mountains, and the other is in this Eureka area that we do have concerns with. And that was during the years of the Falcon to Gondar transmission line study, which was a 10-year research effort. And basically what the publication that Blomberg et al. Published in 2012 found that basically harvest accounted for 2% of the adult mortality in those units. So our population level effects from hunting is pretty minimal, and we're well below that 10% threshold. In the Montana mountains, there was no additive effects of mortality that were found, and that study was actually conducted during the years that we were harvesting between 600 and 800 birds in the Montana mountains alone. So we've got some pretty solid evidence that we're not having an additive effect on the sage grouse population. So we use that information. We use the information from the wing collection the year before to see where we're at in terms of harvest in some of these population management units. And it indicates to us, basically what a wise recommendation for that population should be. And it goes beyond let counts in many cases too, because we do have research efforts that suggest what adult survival rates, nest success looks like, brood survival rates. And by and large, what we're finding is that harvest due to human harvest is a pretty minimal amount compared to what is being lost in the fall to both mammalian and raptor predation. So we're still within that compensatory level. And last year, for example, in the Sheldon National Wildlife Refuge, we saw a pretty substantial amount of winter mortality. If we had known that was going to happen based on habitat conditions and so forth, we probably should have upped the harvest level or upped the amount of take on those birds during the fall special sage grouse hunt season to reduce competition on the winter range. So those are strategies that we need to consider during the development of these recommendations. But I think we're pretty solid with where we stand on these recommendations.
Thank you, and I think you noted this. We are taking a ultra-conservative, maybe not ultra-conservative, but a very conservative approach to these seasons that can be driven in the limited time. This is not the opposite effect. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. I think that, number one, where we have large expanses of available habitat, northwestern Nevada, the central part of the state, portions of Elko County that aren't, affected by wildfires drastically, we have healthy populations of sage grouse. If we get to a point where the department recommends that we shouldn't be hunting sage grouse, that's probably a time that we should invoke a warranted finding, either threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act. So keep that in mind on this as well. And that's one thing that we don't want, is to lead to an additive effect on these populations and contribute to a population decline.
Any other comments or questions before public comment? Commissioner Hubbs?
So, in terms of the wings that are brought into you, is that information you can get out in the field though, or does it have to come from a bird that's been killed and brought in?
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Hubbs. So if we have a research effort going on in a particular portion of the state, we can get that information, recruitment, through the research effort. But that's not something that we have for all areas of the state. So the harvest information not only allows us to determine what proportion of the individuals we might be harvesting on the landscape, but it also gives us an idea of what production looks like. And that's important because if we see a production rate of right around 1.6 chicks per hen, we know that we're having probably a sustainable level of production is that which would contribute to a stable population on the landscape. If we're below that, then we can say that we're probably going to be seeing a population decline. And again, if we're above that 1.6 chicks per hen level, then we can expect a population increase. So that also helps us make recommendations for the next hunting season, for example. So that's why it's so important to get that information. And we separate that by population management unit. So it's a pretty compartmentalized look at how sage grouse are doing in specific areas of the state. Where we don't have hunting seasons in, say, Lincoln County, for example, we have no idea what that production rate might be from year to year. And we don't have enough individuals with GPS transmitters on there, on them to give us that information. We get habitat use information from those GPS transmitters, but we do not get production rates.
And just to go back, are you stating that if we were to do closure until we had better understandings of some of these issues that we previously talked about, the climate change over time, how we're having the severe droughts with the really intense winters sporadically, and not quite knowing how to get in there and get, population estimates sometimes under those circumstances. So if we were to say, let's be ultra conservative for our wildlife and close this, that would potentially trigger a listing. Is that what you're saying, as being endangered?
I'm saying that if those levels are or if those populations are low enough to cause a statewide closure of the sage grouse hunting season, then I think that would trigger someone like the Fish and Wildlife Service to take a much closer look at it. The state of California no longer holds a hunting season for sage grouse. They may be looking at a state listing, and usually that happens with populations like sage grouse that are pretty large distribution range wide. What you'll see is peripheries of the range start to contract and not necessarily be in the middle. But when those peripheries start to contract and you're looking at the population of sage grouse from a range-wide standpoint, how much of that do you consider to be sustainable before you would consider a listing to be appropriate? And so if we're saying that our population is no longer at a position that we could continue to hunt the population, then it's probably in a pretty bad state. And that would speak to how the Fish and Wildlife Service might evaluate it in terms of a listing.
I mean, it looks, I'm just looking at it, and we have 2 days open and a lot of them closed, and I just don't, the logic to me, it seems, I understand that there's a lot to think about when we think about that, but are we just holding on to something that we should, what is best for the wildlife? I guess that's my ultimate question, and I know there's a lot to think about when it comes to that, but I know these are extremely conservative hunting seasons right now, and if you think there is some type of benefit for even having the 2 days, I can see proceeding forward if you think it's helpful to the species overall. But if it's not helpful overall, I think we should just discuss it, because the lambda overall, from what I was seeing, is all pretty consistently, it's wavered near 1 a couple years, but it's been consistently below 1.
Yeah.
Sean, if I might, I think what Commissioner Hubbs might be struggling with, reconciling the idea that you have a lambda below 1, we have a species that is of obvious concern, but yet we have a harvest, a recreational hunting harvest of them, and that seems counterintuitive. I think that if you look at what Sean was talking about in terms of the studies in Nevada showing that harvest is not additive, and we're talking about 2% of those populations, and then look at the value of that data isn't just providing those vital rates so we know what's going on, but they're allowing us to tie those vital rates to other things on the landscape. So whether there's a geothermal plant, and we can actually measure, that harvest is data for us, data to understand the impacts of other things on the landscape, whether it be a mine, whether it be geothermal, whether it be a range fire. And so that data that has been demonstrated, the cost of it has been demonstrated as not being additive source of mortality, but yet it's giving us the opportunity to look around the entire state and tie other impacts on the landscape to sage grouse specifically. So it's really a tool that helps us provide input to land use plans and understand the impacts of other things on the landscape. This isn't solely about us, trying to carve out 2 days to create opportunity for sportsmen and women to pursue them and create this recreational opportunity. Certainly that's a benefit, but really it provides us very useful data to provide input to land use plans and understand the impacts of other things on the landscape, even though it's counterintuitive.
And I would just add, Commissioner Hubbs, that, we still have some pretty robust populations of sage grouse on the landscape. Northwestern Nevada certainly has been affected by some pretty severe drought conditions, but the overall habitat and its intactness is fairly impressive. That's a pretty big contiguous piece of sagebrush habitat that's contiguous with Oregon, it's contiguous with portions of California. We feel that maintaining a 7-day or 9-day hunt there is certainly appropriate given the numbers that we see on Lex. And, even though the aerial survey wasn't as good as we expected this year in some of those units because of the time it was conducted, like I said, we're still conducting ground counts in a lot of those units, and numbers of birds that attended Lex when we were there late in the season, late in April, we still saw, the Twin Lakes Lek had 83 males on it last year, and when we surveyed it this year, it had 76 males on it. So there's still those larger intact leks that we look at and see, okay, there's still a pretty healthy population here. One of the things that we did see this year is that a lot of males were in attendance at the lek, but weren't necessarily strutting. So it makes them a little bit harder to detect on the lek. So you've got to kind of consider those things as well. And birds on a year like this may have been in a little bit worse body conditions, so they might not attend lek. They're still on the landscape, but they're not attending the lek. So we need to think about those detection rates at the lek and consider that as well. So sometimes lek attendance it's a good parameter to look at over a 3-year period, but just from year to year, there's a lot of potential error there that you need to account for.
We'll go ahead and take this agenda item out to public comment on the amendments to the sage grouse seasons before we move on.
Paul Dixon, Clark. This comment will be for both sage grouse and turkey. I won't get up twice and say it, which is when Sean just spoke, he spoke about why each one of those seasons was being reduced verbally. And only one case in the documentation sent out did he give justification for why we were reducing season lengths. The concern at Clark County was raised by the public and felt by a majority of the board, because that's why I'm standing here saying this, is that without the understanding of why we were reducing seasons in the documentation, they were unwilling to allow us to take action on this item because they felt we didn't have the appropriate information. I will go back and let them know most of this information, I think, sits in the Upland Game Bird the Upland Game Bird stamp plan when you read the front of it there. And looking at that, which is what I told people, but they still wanted me to get here and suggest that if we're going to have reductions in seasons, there needs to be, for the public, clear indication of at least a pointer to where that information comes from or why we're driving that. They don't want to take the chairman's advice or opinion on that, even though I've read all the documentation and understand it pretty well and understand where Sean's coming from. Thank you.
Well, I guess I thought the memo kind of summarized that. That was the cover to it in the background material. It said, amendments that are recommended in this commission regulation deal with sage grouse and turkey season that address local variations in populations, recruitment, and access. But I thought that was the justification for the changes. But if perhaps you might point that out.
I read that several times into my minutes. Oops. The point being is that what they wanted to say was it fire, was it drought, was it mining, or a combination thereof, specifically. And they wanted that piece of information. That was the missing piece. But I understand what you said, Brad. I do have a fun board. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. I think it's important to note too, looking back at what we just did, which was, by my count, I don't know how many projects were specifically geared towards sage grouse, but it's probably about $200,000 or more of upland games stamp money. Even though we don't have the stamps anymore, we still have the account. We have these projects based upon licensed revenue that has helped funding this. There is a value to the number of people being dispersed out during a season. I know there are a lot of people who participate in the elect observations and elect counts who also hunt and then turn in the wings. So I'm certainly comfortable proceeding with the seasons and reducing the seasons, taking the conservative approach. I don't think there's any basis to do any type of further closures based upon what I've heard from the department. I certainly have faith and confidence in Mr. Espinoza when he comes to us with a recommendation that it is the right way to go. Additional comments or questions or motion? Commissioner Hubbs?
Yes, I also have a lot of faith in Sean and very impressed by all the studies going on the ground. I think that they're very well designed. They're very thorough. Obviously, what came of concern was some of the estimates that I was seeing in the results, and understanding that this is a very dynamic situation, and doing anything like a complete closure might have some major ramifications, and it probably would not be warranted to do that. And having this be a fairly conservative proposal, I feel comfortable moving forward with it as well.
Additional comments? Seeing none, I'd move to approve that portion of CR 18-12 Amendment Number 2, the 2019-2020 upland game seasons and bag limits. I think that's what it is. CR 18-12 Amendment Number 2, covering the sage grouse and the Sheldon National Wildlife Special sage grouse hunts as presented.
Second.
Everyone clear on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Move on then to the wild turkey.
Thank you, Chairman Johnston. So moving on to wild turkey, we have one recommended change for the junior wild turkey hunt. We're recommending an increase in the number of available tags from 2 to 4 in Lincoln County. For the normal controlled hunt, the limited entry hunt, we are recommending reducing the number of available tags in hunt units 102 and 065 from 12 down to 10. And that's largely based on some access issues in those units. We're recommending opening hunt unit 154 in Lander County. That was a release of Miriam's turkeys that was done 3 and 2 years ago. And we're recommending that 3 tags be awarded for that hunt. In Lincoln County, we're recommending an increase in the number of available tags from 8 to 12 based on population performance and hunt success in Lincoln County. At the Mason Valley Wildlife Management Area, we're recommending a reduction in tags from 6 to 5 in each one of the 3 seasons for Mason Valley Wildlife Management Area. And then in Pershing County, we're recommending a reduction in the number of tags from 12 to 10. And again, that's another more or less access issue oriented situation there. And that concludes our recommendations for turkeys.
Just, why the reduction in tags in Mason Valley?
Hunt success there this year was quite a bit lower than it was the year before, and we had gotten some reports there that folks were struggling a bit, so we decided to go from 6 to 5.
And I guess I have a broader question, and that was, I'm sure, the topic. I know it was the topic of conversation yesterday. There was a lot going along on the Walker River corridor, which I would consider, turkey habitat in terms of not just in Mason Valley, around Yerington, the management area, but further south with acquisitions of ranch property, state parks, and that. Is that do we know how that is or is not going to impact turkey populations? I mean, it's just a changing landscape along the Walker River, especially the east, with ranches going out of production and into state parks. And so I don't know if that's a fair question at this point in time.
Thanks for the question, Chairman Johnston. Yeah, and that is a fair question. I don't know if I have a great answer for you, but when you take those fields out of production, potentially you are reducing carrying capacity for turkeys within that area. That being said, I know that the state parks is interested in expanding turkey and potentially even pheasant populations. Some of those areas probably will become good areas for California quail. I can see them expanding in some of those areas, depending on how management goes forth there. We're in conversations with some folks there at the Walker River State Recreation Area and how to potentially create or develop some habitat, whether that be in food plots or what have you. But I think as they get their feet under them a little bit better and how they want to deal with water management and so forth, I think we can come in and provide some recommendations. But how that may affect the turkey distribution, I'm not exactly sure yet.
Okay. Any additional comments, questions? Public comment on the proposed amendments to the turkey quotas or tag them? Seeing none, bring it back to the commission. Vice Chairman Valentine.
Make a motion to approve that portion of CR 18-12 amendment number 2, 2019-2020 seasons and bag limits for wild turkey as presented by Mr. Espinoza.
Second. Okay, I got a motion by Commissioner Valentine, seconded by Commissioner Barnes to approve that portion of CR 18-12 amendment number 2 covering the wild turkey. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 8-0. We'll then move on to agenda item number 17. The biennial upland game release plan for fiscal years 2020 and 2021. Wildlife Staff Specialist Sean Espinoza for possible action. The Commission will review and may take action to approve the Department's proposed biennial upland game release plan for fiscal years 2020 and 2021. Mr. Espinoza.
Thank you, Chairman Johnston. Commissioner Sean Espinoza, Upland Game Staff Specialist for the record. I'll just kind of summarize the elements of the release plan rather quickly. For California quail, we have basically a blanket statewide release narrative that would allow us basically to release California quail caught normally in the urban settings and then for release as augmentations or introductions into suitable habitat. As far as mountain quail are concerned, we continue to have Lincoln County, 2 release sites in Lincoln County as proposed to try and establish some populations of mountain quail and associated with some water developments that we've placed down there in Lincoln County. It's been a little bit difficult to achieve some source stock of California or mountain quail in Nevada and eastern California for release into Lincoln County, but that's something we feel like we want to continue to pursue. We have a release site in White Pine County in Hendrys Creek in the Snake Range Hunt Unit 114. We actually released 105 mountain quail into Hendrys Creek last year, and we will be conducting the final release this upcoming year if approved. We have a couple of Rio Grande turkey releases proposed, 2 in Lincoln County, one in the Delamar Mountains, and then one in the Wilson Creek Range in Hunt Unit 231. And then in Lyon County, we have an augmentation scheduled for Mason Valley Wildlife Management Area, but it is a bit contingent upon captures of birds in the Battle Mountain area that have moved into some of the more urbanized settings of Battle Mountain. For Merriam's turkeys, we have a proposed release in White Pine County in Negro Creek or Hendrys Creek in the Snake Range in Hunt Unit 114, and then also in Hunt Unit 103 in Elko County in the South Ruby Mountains. And we've found success with Merriam's turkeys, at least initially in the North Toyabe Range, from birds that were captured from the Colville Indian Reservation in Washington. For ruffed grouse, this one's been a proposal for a while, but we feel it's important to augment the existing population in Humboldt County in the Boyd Basin area of the Pine Forest Range through a source stock in the Santa Rosas. And then in Elko County, we would like to propose moving birds from the Tennessee Mountain, Merritt Mountain area into the bull runs if necessary, and this is to replenish the population after the South Sugarloaf fire. And then we have also the last one is a proposed release of beaver, if necessary, into certain watersheds where we deem it necessary with some of the state or the federal land management agencies as a release valve, basically for watershed restoration purposes. And that would conclude our proposals for the biennial release plan.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions? Commissioner Hubbs?
One of the questions I had was, out of all of these species, which ones are native versus non-native, just to go over it really quickly?
So all of these are endemic species.
Even the Rio Grande turkey?
Well, endemic to North America.
Oh, endemic, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
not necessarily
Nevada.
native to the state of
Okay.
Nevada.
Use his words carefully.
So California quail, I would consider those native to the state of Nevada, as well as mountain quail. Rio Grande turkey, a non-native to the state of Nevada, as well as Merriam's turkeys. Ruffed grouse, although there are states all around us, probably were not native to Nevada, but given how ruffed grouse are doing throughout the remainder of their range, and how they've done through the minimal amount of translocations that we've done, we feel that that's probably, from an overall population standpoint, a benefit to the population as a whole. They are struggling in other portions of the range, such as the Northeast, due to habitat management. They tend to do well in second growth type forest situations, and in some places around the country, a lot of those places are succeeding into older age class forests, which may not be necessarily good from a ruffed grouse perspective. And there's also incidences of West Nile virus that have affected populations in Michigan and the upper Northeast. So in Nevada, we have experienced a little bit of a population decline in some of our areas, particularly in northeastern Nevada. We're not sure if that was a West Nile virus event or just drought influenced, but overall we feel that our ruffed grouse efforts are overall benefit to the population of ruffed grouse as a whole. And then beaver were certainly native to the state of Nevada.
Did Nevada ever have its own species of turkey, or did we just? It's not known. They were not documented here.
They were not documented here as far as we know.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Public comment? Seeing no public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the biennial upland game release plan for fiscal years 2020 and 2021 as presented.
I'll second that. Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch, seconded by Vice Chairman Valentine to approve the small game release plan for fiscal years 2020 and 2021 as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries 8-0. Move on then to agenda item number 18, reports informational. Agenda item 18A, department activity report. Secretary Wasley. Secretary Wasley will provide a report on recent department activities.
Thank you, Chairman Johnston. There's a fair amount in this report that I'll cover in a subsequent agenda item on the legislative report, so I'll skip over that for now. Starting with the director's office, the legislature has approved the purchase of a new building for our Southern Region office. The Department of Wildlife is presently in a building that we moved into in 1969 on Vegas Drive. The department has been in that building for just a few months shy of 50 years. That property on which that building is located was originally given to the Nevada Fish and Game Commission in 1957. The department outgrew that building officially probably in about 2005 and began to lease space around the Las Vegas Valley, not only for office space but also for storage. This will allow us to consolidate all those leased properties. It is a location I know some of you are familiar with, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to close on that property in the next few weeks. There's one remaining hurdle. The department needs to receive final approval from the Interim Finance Committee. We'll be attending that meeting on the 25th next week for final go-ahead because the effort was spanned across 2 fiscal years. We were before the Interim Finance Committee in the previous fiscal year to get approval with earnest money and to go forward with some of the tenant improvements. And then next week we'll be seeking approval for the balance, and then we can go ahead and close and hopefully look for a move-in date in mid-August with the hope of having an open house. When we have our September commission meeting in Las Vegas, we're hopeful that we'll be able to share that with you all and host some kind of open house so we can share that. Commission General Regulation 482, which was a public and sellable list regulation, will be heard at the Legislative Commission meeting, which is on Tuesday, the 25th, the same day that the Interim Finance Committee meets to provide us hopefully final approval on the office. So that public and sellable list regulation, the final remaining hurdle on that is approval by the Ledge Commission. Again, that'll be on Tuesday. So upon adjournment of the Interim Finance Committee meeting, then the Ledge Commission convenes. Just some data on that, over 90% of the customers chose to have their information kept private from the public list distributed by the department, and 46% of the customers chose to have their information kept off the draw results. So we had over half the people, when we split that and we brought that language before you, we had over half the people applying, 54%, chose to share their draw results on that list, but over 90% chose to keep their information private and keep it off the sellable list. From the game division, some positive news to share. Annually, the Wildlife Society evaluates several publications and recognizes the outstanding contribution in 3 different categories. This year, the monograph titled Effects of Power Lines on Habitat Use and Demography of Greater Sage Grouse. Is the winner of the Wildlife Publication Award in the monograph category, and the monograph was co-authored by staff specialist Sean Espinoza, and it concludes about 15 years of combined research that includes significant portions of Nevada. So I just wanted to give Sean a congratulations and a shout out there. Despite department concerns related to some of the large wildfires in northwestern Elko County, the reestablished sharp-tailed grouse population seems to be doing pretty well. 49 male grouse were observed on 3 leks during our surveys this year. This is the highest number of attending males ever observed in the area. We also discovered a nesting hen that was about 20 miles south of the main lek complex, and given the distance from the main lek complex, this may indicate the presence of another lek in that area that's yet to be discovered. Game Division staff attended a coordination meeting with Department of Transportation to strategize a plan for upcoming transportation and wildlife summit hosted by Department of Transportation in Carson. Possibly this upcoming October is the date they're looking at hosting that. So we're looking into different venues near the Capitol building in Carson so that it can be attended by the governor or staff from the governor's office. And the workshop is planned to focus on county planning to incorporate wildlife movements and attractants before construction begins. Kind of proactively get out on the front end of some of these conflict situations. So if cities, counties, and municipalities can incorporate road and wildlife planning in the inception of a project, it may be possible to avoid some of the movement impediments and reduce attractants that can make wildlife a potential nuisance. Game Division staff attended an interstate pronghorn capture coordination meeting with Oregon, Idaho, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and BLM on May 13th up in Oregon. The focus of the meeting was on coordinating the timing of capture activities, data sharing agreements, coordinating field activities, capture data collection protocols, and future collaborative efforts relative to the Secretarial Order 3362, which was a secretarial order on migration corridors. It was issued by former Secretary Zinke. It deals primarily with pronghorn, mule deer, and elk. There's been some subsequent efforts to try to include moose and bighorn sheep in that that have been unsuccessful thus far, but really just a kind of a Intermountain West, Great Basin initiative. Game Division staff have been planning and organizing for pronghorn captures this fall. We're tentatively planning to begin captures in north central and northwest Nevada on September 24th through the 27th. As part of the migration corridor identification supported through the Department of Interior secretarial order that I just referenced. They have made some money available to states through a proposal process. I'm not certain of the exact amount that Nevada has received, but I believe it's in somewhere in the magnitude of $300,000 for better understanding and delineation of some of those movement corridors. Several bighorn sheep translocations are in the planning stages. The Game Division continues to work with Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe to facilitate funding and logistics for a possible reintroduction of bighorn sheep into tribal lands, perhaps as early as this fall. Recent funding proposals through BIA were unsuccessful. We continue to assist their staff in submitting funding requests to other funding sources. Their natural resources staff will be requesting internal tribal funds this summer through the Tribal Council. The Game Division is in discussion with Utah Division of Wildlife Resources regarding a translocation of desert bighorn sheep to their mineral mountains for this fall. A variety of options to meet Utah's needs have been discussed, but a final plan is yet pending. Potential plan is expected to be developed with Utah next month. In addition, the Game Division is exploring translocations of California bighorn sheep into units 032, the McGee Mountain, and 014 in the Negro Creek area. Final planning efforts should be complete by August and may involve additional units as well. Wildlife staff specialists presented a lecture webinar, or via webinar titled Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Wildlife Health Committee Bighorn Sheep Herd Health Monitoring. For the technical workshop, bighorn sheep and domestic sheep. What do we know about herd health, pathogen transfer, and disease status? That was held on June 10th and 11th. Game Division staff attended the Free Roaming Equid and Ecosystem Sustainability Summit in Reno the end of last month. The summit was well attended and about 90 organizations were represented by more than 125 people. As with most recent years, the department has detected springtime elk mortalities within Management Area 6. One cow died on May 1st near Frost Creek in the Bull Run Basin. Another cow died May 14th near Cedar Ridge. Body temperature data transmitted by a rumen implant indicated elevated temperatures beginning on May 12th. Eastern region biologists observed this cow on May 13th while attempting to euthanize and collect tissue samples. The cow was startled and departed the area. The most recent elk death occurred in Unit 067 on June 13th, which similarly showed a spike in temperatures beginning June 11th. Game biologists attempted to locate the animal on June 12th, but the elk avoided detection. In total, 4 radio-collared elk have died this spring. 2 were from Unit 062, and 1 from 065, and 1 from Unit 067. Staff from the USDA Poisonous Plant Research Lab have conducted field site inspections in units near where the mortalities were located. Although the timing is consistent with poisonous plant consumption, elk in other areas also deal with poisonous plants and seem to avoid them. Lesions and testing results seem to point to epizootic hemorrhagic disease or blue tongue, but not consistently. Some of the factors associated with disease conditions like cool weather are somewhat inconsistent as well. The ultimate cause of death continues to elude us. An elk exclusionary fence was completed in North Ruby Valley to provide relief to a landowner receiving damage on alfalfa pivots. Game Division staff attended the WACWA sanctioned mule deer working group meeting late May as part of the 2019 Deer and Elk Workshop in Marfa, Texas. Overall, the meeting was productive and Nevada was represented in various ways for upcoming projects that the Mule Deer Working Group is pursuing. Staff Specialist Cody Schroeder agreed to co-author a chapter on invasive species impacts to mule deer habitat as part of a new book on mule deer ecology and management. Schroeder participated in a panel discussion with several other state agencies and a representative from GoHunt.com on the advantages and disadvantages of bonus points, preference points, point creep, and other aspects of a lottery-based draw system for tag allocation. Staff Specialist Cody McKee represented the department on a panel that discussed private lands cooperation with state elk management. USDA Wildlife Services and the department completed the annual goose roundup throughout portions of the western region during the week of June 3rd. 367 geese were captured, which included 26 recaptures from previous years. Areas trapped included Virginia Lake, Idlewild Park, Manzanita Lake, Lake Park, Truckee Meadows, Envy Energy, Fisherman's Park, Miraloma Park, Sparks Marina, Silver Oak Golf Course, and Edgewood Golf Course. Wildlife staff assisted with the collection of fecal samples. Wildlife staff assisted Fish and Wildlife Service, LaHunt National Fish Hatchery Complex in Gardnerville, Nevada, with a bacterial infection that was leading to increased mortality in their brood stock. Wildlife staff attended a joint meeting of the Fish and Wildlife Service with the Desert Tortoise Recovery staff and Department Diversity staff. Habitat Division water development crews are in the midst of annual volunteer build season. Northern crew has finished 4 guzzler rebuilds and 1 new build at Walker Lake that we heard about yesterday. The new build at Walker was built on April 11th. Technical Review Program has been working on U.S. Forest Service Greater Sage Grouse Land Management Plan revision and U.S. Forest Service NDOW Master Memorandum of Understanding revision. Additionally, the program has been developing guidance for feedback for federal partners relative to oil and gas and geothermal lease sales. Assistance and guidance have also been provided internally for coordination and implementation of the temporary regulations relating to mitigation requirements under the direction of the Sagebrush Ecosystem Program. The department provided comments on the White Pine County Silver State Trail environmental assessment to the BLM. We also had a copy of Chairman Johnston's letter from the commission. That was provided to the BLM and to the White Pine Board of County Commissioners on June 4th. It's recently been brought to our attention that the BLM may need to open a second public comment period as they updated the wildlife data used in the analysis, and therefore the analysis changed. Flooding concerns have recently increased along the Walker River, especially at Mason Valley Wildlife Management Area. Topaz and Bridgeport reservoirs are currently near storage capacity, limiting their ability to manage the runoff, especially given the high temperatures in the last couple weeks. Thus far, the department has avoided any major damage to buildings and infrastructure at both the Wildlife Management Area and Fish Hatchery. The high flows are expected to be a few inches below what was experienced in 2017 and will most likely crest by the end of this month and remain high through most of the summer. Conservation Education Division, the department held our annual Outdoor Education Instructor Training Academy at the Paradise Shooting Range located about 2 miles south of Eureka. More than 150 instructors attended the annual training and were cross-trained in hunter education, angler education, and wildlife education. Training sessions included tips and tactics on how to properly engage with students, how to lead a class both in a classroom setting as well as outdoors. Biologists representing the Game Division, Fisheries Division, and Habitat Divisions gave presentations to help instructors better understand the department's past and future project schedule. Con Ed staff partnered with the Nevada State Parks for the 2019 Carp Derby on June 1st at Lahontan Reservoir. There were 261 kids registered for the event and close to 350 in attendance. Staff manned a bait booth and recorded the weight of each fish caught for the big fish prize at the end of the derby. Upon registration, each kid was entered in a raffle for prizes, and nearly every child that attended received a prize. Con Ed staff partnered with Carson City Lions Club for their kids fishing derby on June 1st at Bailey Pond. There are about 400 people in attendance there. Approximately 150 to 200 kids took aim shooting at the department's archery range. The event combined angler and archery education and was a great outdoor education platform for the department staff. The Sparks Rotary and City of Sparks held their 2019 Kids Free Fishing Day on June 8th at the Sparks Marina. 1,200 free fishing rods were given away to children, and close to 2,500 people attended that free fishing event. Department staff and volunteers worked a variety of education stations, including aquatic mammals, hides and skulls table, and the Operation Game Thief trailer. Department staff participated in multiple media interviews and a Facebook Live event. The event had multiple free opportunities for the public, including free ice cream, face painting, and hot dogs. This year was the 18th anniversary of the kids fishing event and was a great success. Despite windy conditions, attendance for the Free Fishing Day event at Veterans Memorial Park in Boulder City was significantly higher than in recent years. Estimates put the number of participants at nearly 400, which included both adults and kids. Catfish and bluegill were stocked in the days preceding the event. Partners included Boulder City Parks and Rec Department and National Park Service. Representatives of a local trade union stopped by and gave away 50 fishing rod and reel combinations. Names and numbers were drawn for rods and other prizes, and each youth went home with something to help them go fishing. Additional events were held at Floyd Lamb Park, Echo Canyon State Park under the direction of Las Vegas City Council and Echo Canyon Park Supervisor. Free Fishing Day events were also held at both Cave Lake State Park and Chinese Gardens in Carlin, with over 100 participants in attendance. Staff conservation educator received a partial scholarship to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Summer Educator Retreat. This staff conservation educator and the Southern Region wildlife educator will be attending this retreat in July in the hopes of learning new teaching techniques to create new programming and improve upon existing programming. Public information officer set up monthly segments with KOLO 8 News and Lotus Radio, which will air on KOZZ, KDOT, KTHX, KUUB, KHIT, a myriad of stations. The first interview with Lotus Radio, take note, Con Ed. The first interview with Lotus Radio aired in May. The PIO talked about different events and programs the department has scheduled for the summer. First segment with KOLO 8 will feature PIO will talk about summertime wildlife activity and tips on living and recreating in areas with abundant wildlife. State PIO did interviews on bear awareness with KOLO 8, KRNB, and KTVN. Also did rattlesnake safety interviews with KRNB and KKOH Radio. As part of the contract, Con Ed staff conducted interviews on spring wildlife with Lake Tahoe Television. The department's social media following continues to increase. This month's department Facebook page reached more than 37,000 likes and now has more than 38,000 followers. The department's Instagram reached nearly 6,700 followers, and Twitter reached over 3,600 followers. The department's YouTube page has grown by 300 followers from last month to just over 2,000 subscribers. Wildlife Diversity Division. The Diversity Division completed the 2019 Bat Blitz earlier this month. It was the largest blitz ever held with over 60 participants from multiple state and federal agencies, NGOs, and private consultants. The Bat Blitz was a success thanks to the leadership of our Southern Region biologist, Christy Klinger. Christy did an excellent job organizing participants on of varying experience levels, wrangling large amounts of equipment, and efficiently deploying multiple teams each night of the Blitz. We're able to survey 25 sites across the Mojave Desert, in the Mormon Mountains, Gold Buttes, over the course of 4 nights. In the end, it's caught more than 530 bats of 13 different species. This is the second year of statewide ferruginous hawk surveys. We're monitoring at least 12 territories, and while most were occupied early in the season, it appears many nesting attempts have failed this year, with the exception of one nest in Coal Canyon in the western region that fledged 2 birds. We have a more intensive satellite tracking study of ferruginous hawks in the eastern region. There were 8 birds outfitted with satellite transmitters last year, of which only 2 juveniles remain. Each had laid eggs a couple months ago, but unfortunately all breeding attempts in the area have failed this year. It's likely due to the heavy snow and rain from late winter, early spring, which has caused the nest failures. While we will not be able to deploy any new transmitters this year, we'll continue to track the juveniles from last year. Wildlife Diversity Division has a multi-year study of golden eagles in Dry Lake Valley in Lincoln County, as well as in association with Highcroft Mine in northwestern Nevada. In the primary study area, all 15 territories were occupied early in the breeding season. Breeding attempts were confirmed at 7 territories, but only 4 territories have been successful so far. There were 5 transmitters redeployed on nestlings this spring at 4 territories to add to 4 eagles being tracked with satellite transmitters from previous years. Transmitted individuals are intended to provide information about habitat use throughout the year, with particular attention to breeding and natal grounds. There were 2 adults and 12 nesting peregrine falcons banded with feather samples collected in southern Nevada. The project is intended to provide an update on contaminant levels in this top avian predator and how that relates to territory occupancy rates and breeding success. Simultaneously, genetic analyses are being conducted in collaboration with Nevada State College to look at population structure, assess dispersal trends, and territory turnover in light of mercury contamination. Central Nevada, we're completing egg mass surveys and preparing for the annual Columbian Spotted Frog Survey in Indian Valley. The survey is a multi-agency effort to mark and recapture frogs over the course of a week to track long-term population trends. Elsewhere in the state, diversity biologists are conducting breeding bird surveys, northern goshawk surveys, and shorebird surveys. Initial data is showing low shorebird numbers due to high water levels. The Fisheries Division, continued high runoff from the winter. Snowpack should continue to maintain reservoir storage and stream flow throughout most of western and northern Nevada throughout the summer. This will continue to benefit fisheries, but is causing some delays in field surveys and other management activities. Marlette Lake was finally accessible this week, but ability to obtain eggs from the rainbow and cutthroat broodstock is uncertain because of the late date. Another benefit of the past winter conditions is unexpected high runoff in the Colorado River system. Revised projections for Lake Mead suggest the reservoir will remain at or above current storage levels through the spring of 2021. Forecasts early last winter predicted further lake level declines and likely drought conditions, but new projections for the lake levels in 2021 are to be more than 30 feet higher than originally thought. Eastern and Western region biologists have completed warm water fish stocking for this spring to take advantage of the good reservoir storage conditions. Additional recent stockings include wipers for Rye Patch and Lahontan, white bass for Rye Patch and Washoe Lake, crappie for restocking Willow Creek Reservoir, and channel catch for several urban ponds and Rye Patch Reservoir. In mid-May, a tanker truck of sulfuric acid overturned in Maggie Creek near Carlin on State Route 766, spilling approximately 3,000 gallons. Fortunately, this occurred on lower Maggie Creek below the Lahontan cutthroat trout habitat on private land, and fisheries impacts were minimal. Dilution of the chemical occurred quickly because of high flow conditions in both Maggie Creek and the Humboldt River. Fisheries Division staff are continuing to work with Fish and Wildlife Service and Newmont and Barrick to address potential impacts to the endemic relic dace, an endemic fish from the Long Canyon Mine Phase 2 project. Relic dace populations in Goshen Valley in eastern Nevada were petitioned for emergency listing in 2014 and are currently undergoing listing review. The project would likely affect a large wetland complex which holds a significant part of the global populations of the species. Fishery staff in eastern Nevada have been assisting USGS in inventory and assessment for 11 spring snail species that have been petitioned for Endangered Species Act listing. These efforts will help inform the listing decisions on these species by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service identified for fiscal year 2021. Monitoring of these species is particularly challenging because many known locations are on private lands with limited access, and existing information on the species and locations of occurrence is limited and poorly documented. Data and Technology Services Division, really brief report. 2019 big game draw application period opened March 19th, continued through April 29th. Department staff helped provide coverage for our customer support center. The department received 317,787 applications, which was 8.5% more than the previous year, to bring a total of 74,429 applicants in 2019. We are hoping to have the Data and Technology Services Division Administrator position filled shortly. We scheduled those interviews yesterday, so over the course of the next couple weeks. So perhaps as soon as the next commission meeting, we may have a new division administrator to introduce to the commission. Law Enforcement Division, several cases from prior years are now moving ahead with various phases of charging and prosecution. 2 Idaho men, Wade and Blake Asher, are facing 27 counts of wildlife violations for their role in the illegal killing of 2 mature mule deer bucks in the far northeast corner of Nevada last fall. Blake Asher turned himself in while his brother Wade was arrested on a warrant. Braden Norton of Washington, Utah, was arrested May 13th for the killing of a very large mule deer buck in Lincoln County back in November 2016. This case took a couple of years for the information to develop. Felony charges were filed in Elko Justice Court against Idaho resident Skip Crown for the illegal killing of a mountain lion without a tag in 2016. Crown was already revoked in Idaho for wildlife violations. Felony charges were filed in Humboldt County against Charles Seipel for the illegal killing of a mule deer in March of 2017. Felony charges were filed in Elko Justice Court against Jay Jurgensen for illegal killing a large mule deer buck, also in the far northeast corner of Nevada. Felony charges were filed in Elko Justice Court against Alan Malote for illegal killing of a mule deer. Associated with this case, Steve Thornhill had already been convicted for obstructing a game warden. Felony charges were filed against Jaime Salazar for ex-felon in possession of a firearm. The charge stemmed from a hunting accident investigation in which Salazar allegedly shot and injured another hunter with a rifle while coyote hunting. And Chief Game Warden and other staff worked extensively on a dozen bills related to wildlife and boating during the legislative session. Overall, we had a successful session with updates to several statutes and the passing of new laws. Southern Region Game Wardens recently completed operating under the influence checkpoint on Lake Mojave that netted several arrests. 4 members of a large party of students from the University of California, Santa Barbara were arrested for possession and/or distribution of cocaine and other drugs, while several others in the party were cited for underage alcohol issues. 3 other boaters unrelated to this party were arrested for operating under the influence. Southern Region Game Wardens have also recovered 3 stolen vessels in recent weeks. Western Region Game Wardens are investigating a serious injury jet ski accident which happened at Lahontan Reservoir on June 16th. 1 person was hospitalized, but lucky to be alive after getting T-boned at a high speed by another personal watercraft. Game Warden Captain Brian Eller is deeply involved in planning for the International Wildlife Crime Stoppers Conference that the department is hosting next month. The organization, then called the International Association of Natural Resource and Crime Stoppers, was founded in 1997 with 7 member states, Nevada being the first to host the conference in 1998. It's a full circle experience with the conference coming back to Nevada, now with member organizations representing over 40 states and a large group of Canadian territories and provinces. That concludes the department activity report, but I would ask if Chief Warden Turnipseed might give a brief update to the commission on some of the recent shed hunting patrols and activities and citations. I know that's come up recently. Talked a little bit about it yesterday, but wasn't anything in the report. So Chief Warden Turnipseed wanted to give a brief update to the commission on those efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director Wasley, and members of the Commission. Chief Game Warden Tyler Turnipseed for the record. Yeah, I know came up yesterday, and it sounds like probably going to see some shed antler issues about the season on a future agenda, whatever that may look like as we sort of evaluate the first year and a half of that regulation. So I just thought I would give a couple quick updates. It's been in our activity report in past meetings, but sort of a brief update on how our season went, or the season closure went. We, in addition to our regular routine patrols, we conducted 3 or 4 saturation patrols in which we directed several game wardens at a particular target area for 3 or 4 days at a time to target a specific shed hunting spot. Did one in White Pine County, one up in the northeast corner, 081, and then one on Spruce Mountain. Those saturation patrols didn't net very many contacts, no citations. But we had a good presence in the field. We did contact quite a few people out in the field that didn't have antlers, but were out in the field doing whatever they were doing. All total, we issued 5 citations this spring for collecting sheds out of the season or during the closed season. All 5 of those citations were in Lincoln County. All 5 of those citations were to Utah residents. So a trend that was maybe expected, but proved true this year. We also did some surveillance on a couple specific groups that were suspected of collecting illegally. Monitored one group in particular in the Ely area for several days. Ended up contacting them in the field as they were coming out of a canyon, but with no antlers. So weren't sure if they were caching or GPSing or whatever, but had no antlers with them at the time. Later conducted a traffic stop on them as they left the state, headed back to Colorado, and they had no antlers with them at the time of that traffic stop. So some of the challenges and successes of how it's proven to be enforcement-wise. Some of the challenges or criticisms that we've heard is that there were people out caching antlers prior to the season opener, GPSing antlers, that sort of stuff. Obviously that's hard to detect and hard to enforce. We did find a couple antler caches and set up on those with some surveillance and cameras and that sort of stuff, but weren't able to make any cases on those. So a little bit of a challenge there that we heard that some of that stuff was going on. But on the other hand, heard of it as also being a success in that, at least in White Pine County and parts of Elko County, it was reported that the animals were much less disturbed than in prior years. A lot of roads that clearly hadn't been driven on yet this spring. Big game animals that wintered down on the benches down close to the valley floor and weren't pushed back up the mountain like they have been in years past. So I would call it at least a partial success from that standpoint. In the whole reason that we addressed that issue was for the protection of that big game resource, and it clearly had some benefit for that. So that's just a brief overview of what it looked like this year, but I don't know if this is a for comment item, but I know a couple of you asked me some questions yesterday. I'm certainly open to further questions if you have any thoughts.
Seeing none, thank you. Oh, Commissioner Hubbs?
Just to refresh on the regulation that we put in place, is there a penalty for caching?
It's a good question that I guess has a complicated answer. So thank you for the question, Commissioner House. It says that it's illegal to collect. So essentially you would have to catch somebody picking up an antler and then catch them in between the time that they pick it up and then go cache it, or catch them when they pick up their cache, presuming that they were cached during the close season. So if they're caching them and then come back on the opening day, we heard some reports of people coming out of the mountains on the morning of opening day with loads of antlers, presumably that they shouldn't have been able to collect by that time on opening morning. So I guess to answer your question, caching would be illegal, just very hard to detect.
And there has been no documented caching piles, just that there was no way that somebody could possibly collect that many antlers in one visit.
We did find a couple piles in our patrols, out on foot, looking around, and set up some surveillance on those piles, waiting for the people to come back. But either they didn't come back or we didn't detect them coming back during the close season and weren't able to make those cases. We're working on some other types of surveillance and digital technologies of how to catch people doing this, but haven't put any of those cases together yet. Thank you.
I guess I shouldn't have let you walk away so quick.
We just want to see how fast you can walk.
I guess quick question. If the game warden was to come across a stockpile of shed antlers during the close period, with the assumption that someone's going to come back and pick them up, and I understand you guys want to try to catch the individuals, that's going to be hard. Does the law allow the game wardens to take that pile of antlers out of the field when they're found? Because it seems to me that could be an awfully good deterrent tool to people who are going out during the close period, stockpiling a bunch of sheds, then they're going to come back on opening day or something. I understand there's no way that all of them would be found. But if they are found, it seems to me it would be a great tool for the game wardens to load them up in their truck, haul them out, and then when those people come back, it's they're gone. Yeah. Maybe you don't get the criminal case against it or the citation, but it could be an effective deterrent. It's kind of like, I'm not going to equate the two, but sometimes you find a pot grow, rather than trying to catch the people with the pot grow, you destroy the pot grow, and has a deterrent effect. Does the game wardens have the ability to do that right now with the way the law's written?
Yes, I think so. Thank you, Chairman Johnston, Chief Turnipseed again. We wrestle with that in several different venues of, are we better off just picking the stuff up and leaving, like say a trail camera that's out during the time when trail cameras are prohibited? Is it a better deterrent to just take what was there illegally, or set up on it, invest the man hours or personnel hours to actually set up surveillance on it and catch them coming back? And I guess that question probably has a different answer in each scenario. Is it half a dozen chalky white antlers that maybe aren't very big and aren't worth a ton of money? Or is it a stack of primo, fresh brown elk antlers that might be worth $1,000? You know, each scenario being a little bit different to answer that question of, are we going to set up on it and try to catch the person, or just remove it and that's the punishment? So each one would be a little bit different, and it would be dependent on, do we have the personnel to work it? Do we have the technology, the digital surveillance stuff to work it? And the answer is different in each one.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't suggesting one size fits all, and I understand case by case. I guess I wanted to just make sure that the game wardens wouldn't be prohibited from taking a stockpile of antlers, if in that instance you thought that was the best thing to do in that particular case.
Correct, and we gave some direction this year before the season that if any antlers are seized, they need to be documented, logged, and cataloged as evidence like anything else. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Chief Game Warden Turnipseed. Thank you, Director Wasley. With that, we'll move on to the litigation report. Senior Deputy Attorney General Brian Stockton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report is in your support materials. I don't have any significant changes from that time. There's been a number of depositions that have occurred in the Smith versus Wakeland litigation in Washoe County, and those cases are all proceeding. So I would have an update on agenda item number 20, though, which is Mr. Thistle's appeal of his denial of his sub-guide license. I got one. I wasn't sure he'd be able to find this, and I don't know if you remember, we had another appeal where somebody couldn't find where we were meeting. So I had Chief Game Warden Turnipseed contact Mr. Thistle by text message to make sure he knew where we were and so he could find us. Chief Game Warden Turnipseed got a responsive text that Mr. Thistle was not going to appear, that he's decided not to pursue the appeal. So we can ask again when we get to agenda item 20, but they're probably, or that he is not going to come for that appeal. So that's just an update.
Thank you. I had a question on page 4, item number 5. The last sentence in italics of the last two, but prior to that it says a petition for writ of certiorari has been filed with the U.S. Supreme Court. The writ has been granted and the matter will be sent back to the district court. I assume that means the writ was denied.
No, what happened was it was based on a case called Nevada versus Hall, which was a case that held that one state could actually be sued in another state. So Nevada, a Nevada employee had gone to California, got in a car accident and injured the Halls. The Halls sued the state of Nevada in California, and California Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court held and said that that was fine.
Okay.
The Hyatt versus California Tax Franchise Board case was going up at the same time we filed our petition for writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court on this case. And so the Supreme Court looked at them both. They decided to grant certiorari first in the Hyatt case and hold ours in abeyance. So what happened was when they reversed Nevada versus Hall in the Hyatt case, they granted certiorari and remanded our case back to the courts for administration in accordance with the Hyatt case.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And that's working its way back down. And our Solicitor General's office is actually handling that portion of the case. And so once it comes back down to the Superior Court, I assume we'll be able to do a motion to dismiss and get the California portion of the case dismissed.
Okay, so the cert petition was granted and then ruled upon based upon another case and then sent back then.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Too much learning.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to agenda item 18C, the legislative report. Update on the 80th legislative session. Commissioner East and Director Wasley. An update will be provided on the 80th legislative session. Due to Commissioner East's absence, we'll defer this to Director Wasley. I would, even in Commissioner East's absence, like to thank her for, I think, an outstanding job that she did as chairman of the legislative committee and in representing the commission before the legislature. I especially want to thank her for the fact that I did not have to make a single trip to Carson City during the legislative session because I don't quite have the personality for that task, as some of you may understand or may not. But I really want to thank her. I think she did a fantastic job, both at the legislative committee level, tracking the bills. It just seemed to go quite smoothly under her leadership and her advocacy at the legislature. And I suspect Director Wasley will speak to some of that.
Yep, thank you, Chairman Johnson. That's right where I was going to start. You stole my thunder.
I love doing that, Tony.
I know you do. It was, things got a little crazy at the end of the session, but Commissioner East always made time in her schedule to drop whatever she was maybe doing in Reno and her day job to drive to Carson. Oftentimes she would spend more time driving one way than she actually would in the hearing. Oftentimes she would sit there and not even have the opportunity to testify or weigh in. But when given that opportunity, she always represented this commission and the agency in a very professional and appropriate manner. I think she did an awesome job, and I think it was a favorable session all in all. What I have is the same support material that's on the table that's in your binders, and I apologize for the size of the font that's on yours, but what I would offer to do is just a quick overview on those bills that the commission took positions on that survived to the end of the session. There were a number of bills that died, that were bills that were unrelated, but just a quick overview of the bills that the commission took action on, the commission's position, and then the ultimate fate of those. So starting with SB 55. SB 55 was an NDOW bill, and that bill revised provisions related to carrying a loaded rifle or shotgun. Basically, it talked about the definition, what constituted a loaded muzzle loader. The commission, the legislative subcommittee voted in support of this 3-0 with Commissioner Johnston absent when that vote was taken. The full commission supported it 9-0. That bill passed. AB 83 was another department bill, and it was kind of a general cleanup bill. There were several aspects in that, but it was really, like I said, a cleanup bill. Just quick and dirty, some of the items added public safety as a reason for the take of wildlife by department employee, added moose to felony provision, change property to pet or livestock in the exemptions for when the killing of a big game animal is not a felony. Dealt with some clarification on residency issues, broaden the definition of harassment for game animals. I know when we talked about shed antler collection, we frequently heard the department already has harassment laws. If people are out there chasing animals around, you can write them a ticket for harassment. We don't need to police shed antler collection. Technically, harassment prior to this legislative session was defined as only by motor vehicle. So now harassment is defined more broadly. So it could be, it isn't limited to aircraft or motor-driven vehicles. Now it's by any means, including, and then it has some specific examples. So that strengthens our ability, and that may come into play with some of the discussions around shed antler collection when we revisit some of those items. There was also an exemption, and that AB 83 also contained an exemption for department employees in the prohibition against trapping within 200 feet of a road. Really, that's to allow for the placement of a bear trap adjacent to a road. In a case several years ago, the defense of some trap tampers where the agency was in violation of our own prohibition of trapping within 200 feet of a road. We wanted to make sure that if we were trapping a rabies vector species in a borrow ditch or had a bare culvert trap adjacent to a road for public safety reasons, that defense would no longer even be possible. So there were several aspects to that. The commission supported that. That too passed. SB 85. This is a CWD related bill. Looking at the states around us, Idaho, Oregon, California, all have bans on importation of potential CWD infected material. The department reached out to the Department of Ag. Department of Ag put forward that language. LCB placed that into NDOW's chapters. That was supported unanimously by the commission, and that bill passed as well. We'll probably be having some discussions on what implementation looks like. We're going to need to do some significant outreach. That bill actually went into effect May 16th. It went into effect upon passage, so that's in effect now. So you'll see probably some increased outreach effort, communication. We're going to try to work with some other states to so they can reach out to non-residents coming into their state and let them know that there's a new law in Nevada. SB 17. SB 17 was Committee on Health and Human Services. This was affectionately termed kind of the deadbeat dad bill, where if people are not paying child support, their license privileges can be revoked. Another bill the commission supported unanimously. It passed. AB 62 was Division of Water Resources. Just an act relating to water, revising the time period for which the state engineer may grant an extension for the completion of work for the diversion of water. It was a bill tracked by the commission, again unanimously supported by the commission, and that passed as well. AB 84 is a conservation bond issue, very similar to Q1 and Q5 prior to that. And specified $30 million for the Department of Wildlife when the state has bonding capacity, and that $30 million can be used for habitat, facilities, maintenance, management. So it's very similar to how the agency has used the Q1 dollars. Those are non-federal dollars, state dollars that can be used for match for all the Pittman, Robertson, Dingell, Johnson. So it's a significant source of revenue that allows the state to garner that federal match in addition to the tag and license revenues. AB 163, again, a water bill, revising certain requirements relating to a plan of water conservation, revising minimum standards for plumbing fixtures and new construction and expansions and renovations in certain structures. The commission unanimously supported that. That passed. A couple others. AB 233 revises provisions on governing certain assessments on water. That was a bill that was sponsored by Assemblyman Kramer. Unanimous support from the commission. AB 404 requires the Board of Wildlife Commissioners to establish certain programs authorizing a person to transfer a lawfully obtained tag under certain circumstances. So AB 404 is going to probably require some action by this body in defining extenuating circumstances. So this, the concepts of this bill were originally contained in another bill and supported by the commission. Essentially what this bill does is that if an individual meets the burden of proof of extenuating circumstances as defined by this body, he or she would have the ability to defer use of a tag till the next available season, get recovery of their bonus points even if it were after the 24 hours before the start of the season, or transfer that tag to an individual. I think it's a first degree of consanguinity. And it doesn't necessarily, the extenuating circumstances as written in this statute don't necessarily have to be affecting just that tag holder. It could be a spouse or a child, or if a family member was injured or deceased or something that interfered with that individual's ability to use that tag, again, as defined by this body, then they have those options. And this is in direct response to some of the challenges that we've had the last couple years without any flexibility or authority to help people out of sticky situations. So that's something that'll be coming back before this body, I'm sure. SB 140 revises provisions relating to appropriations of water in water basins. State engineer to reserve a certain percentage of the remaining water available for appropriation in certain basins, prohibiting the appropriation of such water, authorizing the use of such water in certain circumstances. And so it's just protecting, maintaining a safety margin in available water. Commission supported that, 9-0, that passed as well. SB 316 revises provisions governing actions relating to state lands. Supported 4-0 by the committee. I don't know that the full body had an opportunity to vote on that. I believe this is private property, kind of adding irrigated agricultural lands. So historically, and we can ask Chief Warden Turnipseed to comment on this if we need some further clarification, but historically the posting requirements were a little burdensome even for lands that were obviously private by virtue of the fact that they were irrigated, cultivated, and so that now allows for the existence of irrigated, cultivated lands to be adequate to meet that posting requirement. A few other water-related issues, and then several of the concurrent resolutions or joint resolutions. A concurrent resolution to direct the Legislative Commission to appoint an interim study concerning wildfires passed, and so that would be a body that would include representation from ag, wildlife, forestry, to talk about some of the challenges, wildfire and invasives. Assembly Joint Resolution 2 urges Congress to oppose the expansion of the United States Air Force into the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. Heard a little bit about that yesterday. AJR 3 passed, and that expressed support for the sage grouse conservation plan and the state's conservation credit system. AJR 7 expressed the opposition to the proposed expansion of the Fallon Range and Training Complex. That passed. AJR 8 expressed the opposition of the elimination of Nevada Office of BLM, and this is based on some of the proposed joint management area boundaries former Secretary Zinke put forward, and so this resolution just opposes the elimination of a state office of BLM. And lastly, a Senate Joint Resolution 4 expressed the support of the Nevada legislature for the federal Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And I know that the Recovering America's Wildlife Act item has been before you guys several times. Everything else, everything other than what I mentioned that was on your tracking list died or failed, but I'm happy to dive into any of those items in particular if you have any questions, but it's already more than I planned on saying. But again, a huge thanks to Commissioner East. Her availability and engagement and professionalism was greatly appreciated.
Any questions for Director Wasley? Thank you. And thanks to the department and you and staff for the work at the legislature as well. With that, we've been going about 2 hours. Why don't we take a 10-minute break until 10:35, and then we'll come back and hopefully complete the rest of the agenda. It starts in 35 minutes.